She signed the divorce papers on a Tuesday morning, left them sitting on the kitchen counter for her husband to find, and drove to her sister's house with 2 suitcases and 17 years of marriage she was certain was finally, completely over. She had no idea that God wasn't finished writing their story yet. Her name was Karen Whitaker, 45 years old, married to a man named Robert for 17 years, mother to 2 teenagers who had watched their parents' relationship slowly crumble over the past several years, the way a house settles and cracks so gradually that by the time you notice the damage, it's already deep in the foundation. Karen and Robert had married young, full of the kind of hopeful love that seems, in the beginning, like it could survive anything. But somewhere in the busyness of raising kids, building careers, and simply surviving the daily grind of life, they had drifted apart in a slow, painful way that neither of them had fully addressed until the distance between them had grown too wide to easily cross. Robert had thrown himself into work, staying later and later at the office, coming home distracted and short-tempered, the warmth that used to characterize their marriage replaced, over time, by something closer to polite coexistence. Karen, feeling increasingly invisible in her own home, had pulled away in her own quiet ways, burying herself in the kids' schedules and her own part-time job, the two of them living, in many ways, like roommates rather than partners. The final break came after Karen discovered a series of text messages on Robert's phone, messages with a coworker that, while not physically unfaithful, revealed an emotional closeness and intimacy that devastated Karen far more deeply than she expected. It wasn't the worst thing that could have happened, she would later admit, but it was enough. It was the final crack in a foundation that had already been quietly failing for years. "I gave you 17 years, Robert," she told him the night she found those messages, her voice shaking with a mixture of grief and anger. "I gave you everything I had, and somewhere along the way, I stopped being enough for you. I'm done trying to fix something you don't even seem to want fixed anymore." Robert didn't fight for the marriage the way Karen secretly hoped he might. He was defensive at first, then withdrawn, and within a few weeks, both of them, exhausted and hurt, had quietly agreed that maybe it really was over. Karen filed the paperwork. She moved into her sister's guest room, temporarily, she told herself, though neither of them had any real plan for what came after temporary. Karen had grown up in church, had raised her own children in church, but in the months following her separation from Robert, she found herself avoiding it almost entirely, too embarrassed, too raw, too uncertain how to sit in a pew and sing about a faithful God while her own marriage, the thing she had prayed over and built her whole adult life around, was falling apart around her. Her sister, Denise, a woman of quiet, steady faith, gently encouraged her to keep praying, even in the anger, even in the grief. "You don't have to have it figured out to talk to God about it, Karen," she said one evening, sitting with her on the back porch. "He can handle your anger. He can handle your questions. Just don't shut him out the way you're shutting Robert out." Karen resisted for weeks. But one night, about a month after she'd moved out, lying awake in her sister's guest room, unable to sleep, overwhelmed by grief for a marriage she had convinced herself was already gone, she finally broke down and prayed, for the first time in months, an honest, unguarded prayer. "God, I don't even know what I'm asking you for anymore. I don't know if I want this marriage back. I don't know if Robert even wants it back. I just know I'm exhausted, and I'm hurting, and I don't know how to carry this by myself anymore. If there's anything left worth saving here, you're going to have to show me, because I don't have anything left to fix it with on my own." She didn't feel an immediate answer that night. But something small shifted in her, a willingness, however reluctant, to stop running entirely from the possibility that this story might not be finished yet. Robert, meanwhile, had been going through his own quiet reckoning. Staying in the house they had shared for over a decade, now unbearably quiet without Karen and the kids splitting time between 2 homes, he found himself confronting things about himself he had avoided for years. The distance he had let grow in his marriage. The way he had let work become an excuse to avoid difficult conversations at home. The emotional connection with a coworker that, while never physical, had quietly filled a void he should have been working to fill with his own wife instead. Robert wasn't a church-going man by habit, though he had attended with Karen over the years more out of routine than genuine conviction. But one Sunday, a few weeks after Karen moved out, in a house that felt unbearably empty, Robert found himself driving, almost without deciding to the same church he and Karen used to attend together. He sat in the back row, uncertain why he'd come, listening to a sermon about restoration, about a God who specializes in rebuilding what feels completely broken beyond repair. The pastor, a man named Pastor Gary Holloway who had known Karen and Robert for years, spoke that morning about how pride often keeps people from the very reconciliation they secretly long for, how admitting fault feels like weakness but is often the first real step toward healing. Robert sat in that back pew and wept quietly, the first real tears he'd allowed himself since Karen left, finally admitting to himself what he had been too proud and too defensive to admit to Karen directly. He had let his marriage slowly die through neglect, through distraction, through years of choosing everything else over the woman he had once promised to love and protect above all else. After the service, Robert approached Pastor Holloway, and the two of them sat together in the empty sanctuary for almost an hour, Robert finally speaking honestly about everything that had led to this point, the slow drift, the emotional affair he hadn't fully acknowledged even to himself, the fear that it might already be too late to make things right. "Robert," Pastor Holloway said gently, "it's never too late until both people decide it is. Have you actually told Karen any of what you just told me?" Robert admitted he hadn't. He had been too afraid, too ashamed, too certain that Karen had already moved on emotionally, that any attempt to reach out would only be met with the same exhaustion and hurt he'd seen in her eyes the night she left. "Fear is a terrible reason to give up on something worth fighting for," Pastor Holloway told him. "If there's still anything left in your heart worth fighting for, you owe it to yourself, and to her, to at least try." Karen was surprised when Robert called her 2 days later, asking if they could meet, not to discuss custody schedules or financial logistics, but simply to talk. She almost said no. She had grown so accustomed to protecting herself from further disappointment that the idea of opening that door again terrified her almost as much as it tempted her. But she remembered her prayer from weeks earlier, her honest admission that she didn't have anything left to fix things with on her own, and something in her decided to trust that maybe this was part of God's answer, however uncertain it still felt. They met at a quiet coffee shop, both of them nervous in a way that felt strange after 17 years of marriage. Robert spoke first, more honestly and more vulnerably than Karen had heard from him in years, admitting everything Pastor Holloway had helped him finally acknowledge, the neglect, the emotional distance he had let build with a coworker, the years of choosing everything else over prioritizing his own wife. "I'm not asking you to just forget any of this, Karen," Robert said, his voice breaking. "I know I don't deserve an easy path back into your trust. But I'm asking for the chance to earn it back, however long that takes. I let our marriage die a slow death through neglect, and I am more sorry for that than I know how to fully say." Karen cried through most of that conversation, 17 years of hurt and love and exhaustion finally given honest space between them for the first time in longer than either of them could remember. She didn't agree to move back home that day. But she agreed to something that felt, in its own way, just as significant. She agreed to try, slowly, carefully, with the help of a marriage counselor Pastor Holloway recommended, to see if what remained of their marriage was worth rebuilding. The road back wasn't quick or easy. Karen and Robert spent almost a year in counseling, rebuilding trust one honest, difficult conversation at a time, learning to communicate in ways they had abandoned somewhere in the busyness of the previous decade. There were setbacks. There were hard nights. But there was also, slowly, surely, a marriage coming back to life in a way neither of them had believed possible the night Karen signed those divorce papers. Karen moved back home 11 months after she'd left, and the following spring, on their 18th wedding anniversary, Robert and Karen renewed their vows in a small ceremony at the same church where Robert had first broken down in that back pew, surrounded by their children, their extended family, and Pastor Holloway, who officiated with visible emotion of his own. "I stand here today a different man than the one who let this marriage nearly fall apart through his own neglect," Robert said during the ceremony, his voice steady despite the emotion behind it. I don't take one single day of this second chance for granted. Karen, through tears, added her own words. I filed those divorce papers believing our story was already over. I am so grateful God saw a chapter one couldn't see yet. Karen and Robert still attend that same church today, and they often share their story with other couples going through their own seasons of distance and disconnection, careful never to present it as a simple or easy process, but honest about the God who met them both in their lowest, most broken moments and slowly, patiently rebuilt something they had both been ready to walk away from completely. If your own relationship feels like it's crumbling beyond repair tonight, if you've already resigned yourself to believing the story is over, please hear Karen and Robert's story and let it speak hope into whatever you're carrying. Restoration rarely happens overnight, and it almost never happens without honesty, humility, and hard work on both sides. But it can happen. Hearts that feel completely broken are not beyond the reach of a God who specializes in rebuilding exactly what looks unrepairable. Don't sign the final page on your story just yet. God may not be finished writing it.